James Wilson wiped sweat from his brow as he arranged a display of vibrant azaleas outside his landscaping shop. 15 years of building his business from nothing, and days like this, crisp air, birds chirping, the scent of fresh mulch, reminded him why he loved it. His callous hands testified to the hard work that had finally afforded him this modest property 5 years ago. At 45, James had weathered economic downturns, brutal competition from big-box stores, and skeptics who said a first-generation American couldn't build a successful business in the upscale neighborhood of Oak Ridge Hills. But every morning when he unlocked the gates at 5:30 a.m., pride swelled in his chest. Wilson Landscaping and Nursery had become a community fixture, the kind of place where customers became friends and employees stayed for years. Morning Moss called Miguel, who had been with James since day one. He was unloading a shipment of rare butterfly bushes that James had specially ordered for Mrs. Kingsley's Butterfly Sanctuary project at the local elementary school. "Those look perfect," James replied, mentally calculating how many hours of volunteer work he'd need to donate to help the kids install them. Community service wasn't just good karma, it was the foundation of his business philosophy. The screech of tires cut through the morning tranquility. A silver Range Rover swerved into his lot, narrowly missing his prized Japanese maple display. James winced as pebbles sprayed from under the luxury vehicle's tires, pelting the delicate new growth on his specimen plants. "Who drives like that?" Miguel muttered, shaking his head. James watched as a woman emerged, designer sunglasses perched on her head, phone clutched like a weapon. Her cream-colored pantsuit probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment, and the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist caught the morning sun in blinding flashes. She scanned the premises with obvious disdain before marching toward a section of potted hydrangeas, picking one up by its delicate blooms rather than the pot, then dropping it carelessly. "Ma'am, please be careful with," Miguel began, but James touched his shoulder. "I'll handle this," he said quietly. James had dealt with entitled customers before. They were part of doing business in a wealthy area. Usually, a little patient education transformed them into loyal patrons. "Excuse me," James called, approaching with his most welcoming smile. "Can I help you find something?" "Those hydrangeas are particularly special. They're a rare blue variety that took 3 seasons to cultivate." The woman, Patricia Summers, as he would later discover from her credit card complaints, turned with practiced indignation. Her lips thinned as she looked James up and down, taking in his soil-stained work clothes and weathered hands. "Your plants are overpriced and half of them look diseased." She gestured dismissively at his carefully tended nursery stock. "I just moved into Oak Ridge Estates, and I'm just making sure I warn my neighborhood association about the quality here. The previous owners recommended this place." 2 days later, James was arranging a special order of rare orchids when Miguel nudged him. "Trouble at 3 o'clock, he murmured. James glanced up to see Patricia strutting through the entrance, but this time she wasn't alone. 2 women flanked her, one in tennis whites with a diamond pendant that could pay James quarterly taxes, the other in a designer pantsuit with an expression of practiced disdain. They hung back slightly, smartphones held casually but clearly ready to record. "Target acquired," the tennis outfit woman whispered, not quite softly enough. "Remember, get it all on video." James felt his stomach tighten. Since Patricia's first visit, he'd lost 2 corporate accounts, longtime clients who suddenly cited concerns about service quality without further explanation. The timing seemed far from coincidental. He was currently helping Mrs. Gonzalez, an elderly customer who had been coming to him since he opened. The 80-year-old relied on his advice for her small garden that she maintained in memory of her late husband. "So for your roses, Mrs. Gonzalez, this organic fertilizer will. I need to speak to whoever's in charge immediately." Patricia's voice cut through the peaceful atmosphere of the shop, sharp as breaking glass. Her volume was carefully calibrated, loud enough to disrupt every conversation but not quite yelling. Every head in the store turned. James gently squeezed Mrs. Gonzalez's shoulder. "Excuse me for just a moment," he said softly, then approached Patricia with a neutral expression. He was acutely aware of the smartphones now openly pointed at him. "I'm the owner," he said calmly. "How can I help you today, Miss Summers?" Patricia's eyes narrowed at his use of her name. "You remember me." "Good." She thrust her phone into his face, the screen almost touching his nose. "Your delivery truck blocked my driveway for 20 minutes yesterday. My daughter was late for her piano recital. It was a qualifying performance for the state competition." The phone showed a slightly blurry photo of a green truck with Wilson visible on the side panel. A young girl in a recital dress stood in the foreground looking distraught. James carefully examined the image without touching her phone. "Miss Summers, I understand your frustration, but that's not one of my trucks. The logo is similar, but that's Wilson's wholesale nursery from the next county. Notice the font is different and their trucks are forest green, while mine are sage green. Are you calling me a liar?" Patricia's voice rose sharply. hitting a pitch designed to sound threatened. Her friends moved closer, phones now recording from different angles. "I know what I saw. My daughter lost her chance at a scholarship because of your irresponsible drivers." The tennis outfit woman whispered audibly to her companion. "Did you get that? He's calling her a liar." Out of all came the smug reply. Several customers began to edge toward the exit, clearly uncomfortable with the brewing confrontation. The weekend shopping crowd, which typically brought in a third of James' weekly revenue, was evaporating before his eyes. Mrs. Gonzalez looked distressed, clutching her rosebush to her chest. "Ms. Summers," James said carefully, aware of the recording. By Monday morning, James knew something was wrong before he even unlocked the shop doors. His phone had been buzzing with notifications since 5 a.m., and 3 of his regular delivery drivers had called asking if they should come in. "There's some weird stuff online, boss," Luis had said. "Just wanted to make sure we're still open." James had barely slept the night before. Sunday sales had been the worst in 5 years. The weekend crowd never recovered after Patricia's performance. He'd spent the evening recalculating finances, wondering if he could make payroll if things continued this way. As he turned the key in the lock, Malik, his tech-savvy assistant manager, rushed up with a tablet in hand. The young man's usual cheerful demeanor was replaced with barely contained anger. "She's been busy," Malik said without preamble, handing James the tablet. "Really busy." James's shop's review page was flooded with 1-star ratings, 17 overnight. "Owner threatened me when I complain about poor service," read one. "Discriminates against women customers," claimed another. "Uses illegal workers and intimidation tactics," stated a third. All came from accounts created within the last 24 hours, all with common social connections to Patricia. "It gets worse," Malik swiped to a private neighborhood Facebook group that someone had invited him to join. There was Patricia's carefully edited video of their Saturday interaction. It showed James saying, "I know what I saw," completely out of context, making it appear he was the one being aggressive, while Patricia seemed reasonably concerned. She had captioned it, "Local business owner gaslighting a concerned mother." Is this where our community has come to? The comment section was a battleground. Some neighbors James had never met were calling for boycotts, while others, loyal customers, were defending him. The argument had spilled across multiple community pages. "She's telling everyone you're trying to drive out local homeowners to expand your business," Malik explained, scrolling through comments. "Says you've been intimidating elderly residents to sell their properties so you can build a commercial empire." James ran a hand through his graying hair. "That's absurd. We're a plant nursery, not a real estate developer." "Logic isn't exactly driving this conversation," Malik said, showing another post where Patricia claimed James's delivery trucks were intentionally blocking streets to devalue properties. "Oh, and she's apparently best friends with half the zoning commission." Even more concerning was the comment Patricia had pinned to the top of the thread. "Meeting with zoning commissioner Ellis tomorrow about possible violations at Wilson's. Who's with me? Hashtag protect Oak Ridge Estates." James spent Tuesday morning in a strategy session with Lisa, his attorney. Her normally sleek office attire was rumpled from what had clearly been a late-night reviewing the evidence they gathered. "The newspaper article wasn't as bad as it could have been," Lisa said, tapping the local paper where a small story appeared on page 3. "They included your statement and noted the suspicious timing of the reviews." "Small comfort," James replied. He hardly slept. The nursery had received 3 cancellations for landscaping jobs, longtime clients who suddenly needed to reevaluate their options. His crews were growing nervous about job security. "Remember what we discussed," Lisa cautioned. "Document everything, but don't engage directly. She's baiting you, James. One angry outburst on your part, and she'll have exactly what she wants." James nodded wearily. "I need to get back. We have the garden club demonstration at 2. The demonstration had been scheduled months ago, a pruning workshop for the Oak Ridge Garden Society. Mrs. Baxter had insisted they proceed despite the controversy. "If anything, we need to show support now more than ever," she told James firmly. By 1:45, James had arranged chairs in a semicircle near the Japanese maple display. His hands moved automatically, preparing the demonstration tools while his mind churned with worst-case scenarios. The bell over the door chimed as the first garden club members arrived, their cheerful greetings a jarring contrast to his mood. "James, dear," Mrs. Baxter called as she entered with her friends. "We brought reinforcements today." Everyone was simply outraged about those ridiculous accusations. The garden club had indeed turned out in force, nearly 30 members, more than double the usual attendance. James felt a swell of gratitude as they filled the seats, many wearing their club's distinctive green aprons. He was demonstrating the proper angle for pruning fruit trees when he heard it, the now familiar screech of expensive tires on gravel. Through the windows, he saw Patricia's Range Rover pull in, but what made his blood run cold was the vehicle that followed, a police cruiser, lights flashing. "Keep going," Mrs. Baxter whispered, noticing his hesitation. "We're all witnesses." James forced himself to continue the demonstration, though his hands had begun to tremble slightly. When removing larger branches, it's important to make 3 cuts to prevent bark tearing. The shop door burst open. Patricia strode in wearing an immaculate white pantsuit, her face arranged in a mask of distress. Officer Reynolds followed, looking distinctly uncomfortable as he took in the room full of elderly garden club members. "Mr. Wilson," the officer began, removing his hat. "I need a moment of your time." Before James could respond, Patricia rushed forward, positioning herself strategically at the center of the room. "That's him, officer," she exclaimed, pointing dramatically. Her voice carried the performative quiver of someone who had rehearsed their lines. "That's the man who said he'd make me sorry if I didn't stop asking questions about his permits." The garden club members murmured in confusion. Mrs. Baxter's eyebrows shot up toward her white hair. "He told me his friends at City Hall would take care of me if I filed complaints." Patricia continued, voice breaking convincingly as she clutched her designer handbag to her chest. "I don't feel safe with him operating in our community. He's threatening residents who stand up to his expansion plans." Officer Reynolds, a 20-year veteran of the local force, looked increasingly uncomfortable. He'd known James for years. Their kids had played Little League together. "Sir, I'm obliged." James led Officer Reynolds toward his office, mindful of the audience watching this drama unfold. Patricia followed close behind, her designer heels clicking aggressively on the concrete floor. The garden club members, refusing to miss a moment, trailed after them in a determined phalanx of support. "This is a private police matter," Patricia snapped at Mrs. Baxter, who was leading the group. "You people need to stay out of it." "In my experience," Mrs. Baxter replied with the serene confidence of someone who had once been a district court judge before retirement, "the truth benefits from witnesses." James' office was modest, just enough space for a desk, filing cabinet, and 2 visitor chairs. The walls displayed his business licenses, horticultural certificates, and photos of notable landscaping projects. A small window overlooked the nursery floor. "Officer, after Ms. Summers' first visit, I installed additional security cameras with audio throughout the premises," James explained, turning on his computer. "My attorney specifically advised it given the unusual nature of our first interaction." Patricia's confidence visibly wavered. Her eyes darted to the ceiling corners where small, modern cameras were mounted. "You can't record people without their consent. That's illegal." Her voice had lost its performative tremble, replaced with genuine alarm. Officer Reynolds shook his head. "Not in a place of business with posted notices, ma'am." He pointed to the small signs visible at every entrance, signs James had installed the previous week following Lisa's advice. "Those notices constitute legal notification under state law." "I never agreed to be recorded," Patricia insisted, her composure cracking. "You don't have to explicitly agree," Mrs. Baxter interjected from the doorway. "Entering the premises after notification constitutes implicit consent." Harrington v. Midstate Properties, 2018. Officer Reynolds raised an eyebrow at the former judge but nodded in agreement. James pulled up the footage on his computer, turning the monitor so Officer Reynolds could see clearly. "This is from Saturday," he explained. The crystal-clear video showed Patricia entering with her friends, their hushed conversation perfectly audible. "Remember, we need to get him angry. Marie, you start recording when I raise my voice." Jeff at the station said he'll run the story if we get good footage. As the video continued, it captured every moment of Patricia's performance, including parts she'd edited out of her social media posts. Her deliberate provocations, the staged whispers, just loud enough for other customers to hear, and instructions to her friends to get his reaction. Most standing was a moment when Patricia whispered to one friend while pretending to examine a plant, "The property values will tank if this place expands. My realtor says we need to shut him down before the rezoning meeting. I'm not losing 50 grand on my investment because some garden center wants to build a greenhouse." Officer Reynolds watched silently, taking notes as the footage continued to play. The half-dozen garden. The following Saturday dawned clear and crisp, perfect weather for gardening. James arrived in his shop earlier than usual, the events of the week still weighing heavily on his mind. Officer Reynolds had taken Patricia to the station for questioning, resulting in a warning about filing false police reports and possible charges pending further investigation. The immediate threat had passed, but the damage to his business remained uncertain. As he turned onto the street leading to Wilson's landscaping and nursery, James slowed his truck in confusion. Cars lined both sides of the road for nearly a quarter-mile. For a heart-stopping moment, he feared Patricia had organized a protest. Then he spotted Mrs. Baxter's distinctive vintage Volvo with its gardener's Dig Deeper bumper sticker, and beside it, Commissioner Ellis's official vehicle. The parking lot was bustling with activity. Folding tables had been set up throughout the nursery, and people were arranging displays of flowers, garden art, and homemade refreshments. A hand-painted banner stretched across the entrance. First annual Oak Ridge Community Garden Showcase. James parked behind the building and entered through the staff door, nearly colliding with Miguel, who was carrying a tray of coffee cups. "What's happening?" James asked, bewildered. "Community support," Miguel grinned. "Mrs. Baxter's been organizing since Wednesday. Said it was time to correct the public record." In the main area, Mrs. Baxter was directing operations with the precision of a military general. Members from all 5 local gardening clubs were setting up displays, each wearing badges identifying their club affiliation. Several local master gardeners whom James had mentored over the years had stationed themselves throughout the nursery to offer free advice to visitors. "James," Mrs. Baxter called when she spotted him. "Perfect timing. The mayor's arriving at noon, and the newspaper will be here at 11 for photos." "The mayor?" James echoed, still trying to process the transformation of his nursery. "And Channel 5, she added casually. "I may have reached out to a few contacts." Throughout the morning, customers flooded in, regulars and newcomers alike. The gardening clubs had organized a plant exchange, drawing enthusiasts from across the county. James overheard snippets of conversation as he moved through the crowds, helping where needed. "Can't believe those ridiculous accusations. Always been so helpful with my roses. Donated all those plants to the elementary school." By midday, the nursery had done more business than the previous week combined. Commissioner Ellis cornered James near the herbs section, away from the crowds. "I received your greenhouse expansion permit application," she said without preamble. "It's been fast-tracked for approval at Tuesday's meeting." James blinked in surprise. "That's unexpected." Commissioner Ellis glanced around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "Between us, I received an interesting email from Patricia Summers earlier this week, making some extraordinary claims about code violations here. Normally, I'd be obligated to investigate, but..." She paused. "Officer Reynolds happened to call me shortly after, sharing some concerns about potentially fraudulent complaints." She straightened her jacket. "I've known your family for years, James. Your father maintained my mother's garden until his passing. The commission appreciates Buzine."